The war had lasted 11 years. It ended, or so the galaxy believed, on a cold morning above the ash-covered fields of Earth's old capital. The Threxian Empire had come from the far side of the galaxy, riding on ships the size of small moons. They did not come to talk, they came to take. Humanity was young among the stars, barely 200 years into space travel, still arguing about borders and money and old grudges, when the Threxian ships appeared over Mars like a wall of black metal blotting out the sun. The humans fought. They fought hard. But hard was not enough. The Threxians had fought 1,000 wars across 1,000 worlds. They knew how to break a species. First they took the outer colonies, one by one, cutting off supply lines. Then they came for Earth itself. By the 11th year, humanity's fleet was a shadow of what it had been. Only 40 ships remained where once there had been thousands. Earth's cities were scarred. Millions were dead. The Threxian High Command sat in orbit above the planet, waiting for the final surrender, confident that this small, loud, stubborn species was finally broken. Fleet Admiral Elena Voss stood on the bridge of the Last Light, the flagship of what remained of the human navy. She was 51 years old, her hair gray before its time, her hands steady even though her heart was not. Around her, the bridge crew worked in silence. There was nothing left to say that had not already been said. "Signal from the Threxian flagship, Admiral," said Lieutenant Chen, the young communications officer. His voice was flat, tired. "They are demanding our surrender. Again." Elena looked at the view screen. Above Earth, the Threxian mothership hung like a dark moon, surrounded by hundreds of smaller warships. Below, the planet turned slowly, half of it in shadow, half of it burning with the light of 100 fires, still smoldering from the last bombing run. "Open a channel," Elena said. "Let them hear us clearly." The image of Warlord Threxus Kahl filled half the screen. He was a tall being, his skin the color of dark iron, his eyes narrow and cold. He had led the invasion from the beginning. He had watched humanity fall, colony by colony, and he had enjoyed every moment of it. "Admiral Voss," Kahl said, his voice deep and slow, translated through the ship's systems, "you have fought well, for children. But the game is over. Surrender your fleet, and your species will be permitted to live, as servants of the Empire. Refuse, and we will finish what we started. There will be no third choice." Elena did not flinch. She had known this moment was coming for weeks. She had spent those weeks not in despair, but in planning, not for victory today. There would be no victory today, but for what came after. "Warlord Kahl," she said, "humanity surrenders its fleet. You have won this war." A murmur went through the Threxian bridge crew visible behind Kahl. Kahl's mouth curled into something like a smile. "Wise," he said. "Finally, wisdom from the little apes." "But before you celebrate," Elena continued, "I want to give you something, a warning. Consider it a parting gift, since you seem to enjoy collecting trophies." Kahl's smile did not fade, but his eyes narrowed further. "Warnings from the defeated mean nothing." "This one will," Elena said. "You have beaten us today. You have not beaten us forever. Humanity does not forget. We do not forgive easily. And we never, ever stop building. Somewhere out there, in the dark between the stars, humans who escaped your fleets are still alive. They will grow. They will build. And one day, they will come back. When that day comes, remember this moment. Remember that we told you. The Empire ignored humanity's final warning, and it will cost you everything." For a long moment, Kahl said nothing. Then he laughed, a deep booming sound that echoed through the translation system. "You humans," he said, shaking his head, "even in defeat, you cannot stop talking. Very well. I will remember your little speech, Admiral. I will remember it when your grandchildren serve tea in my palace on your dead homeworld." The channel closed. Elena turned to her crew. Every face on that bridge was grim, but none of them looked broken. They had heard the warning too. They knew it was not just words for Kahl. It was a promise to themselves. "Signal the fleet," Elena said quietly. "Execute Operation Quiet Exodus." Far from Earth, in the empty reaches beyond the solar system's edge, a different kind of battle had been fought for months. one the Threxians never saw. While the last human ships gathered in a doomed defense of Earth to buy time, other ships, unarmed and unmarked, slipped away in the chaos of battle. They carried scientists, engineers, children, seed banks, data cores holding every scrap of human knowledge, and the few thousand soldiers who had been chosen not to die gloriously in the final battle, but to survive it. This had been the plan since year 8 of the war, when it became clear that Earth could not win a straight fight. A council of the last surviving human leaders, military and civilian, had made a decision that many called cowardice, and others called the only sane choice left. Humanity would let the Empire believe it had won completely. Every visible ship, every colony, every city would fight and, if needed, fall. But a hidden seed of humanity would slip away into deep space, to survive, to rebuild, and to return. Dr. Marcus Webb, once the lead scientist of Earth's Deep Space Research Division, sat in the cramped control room of the colony ship Providence as it slid silently past the edge of the solar system. Beside him, General Eris Thorne, one of the last senior military officers not fighting at Earth, watched the scanners for any sign of pursuit. "No contacts," Thorne said. "They're too busy celebrating over Earth to notice a few ships slipping out the back door." Marcus did not look relieved. His face was pale, his eyes red from days without real sleep. "We left them to die, Eris. Elena, the crews on those 40 ships, everyone still on the surface. We left them." "They chose it," Thorne said, his voice quiet but firm. "You know that. Elena volunteered to command the last defense herself. She said someone needed to make the Empire believe it was truly finished. She said it needed to look real, or the Threxians would search every corner of the galaxy for the survivors. This way, they stop looking. This way, we get generations to prepare, instead of days." Marcus stared at the black screen ahead of them, dotted with distant, indifferent stars. "Generations," he whispered. "We are betting the entire future of the human race on the idea that a proud, cruel empire will simply forget about us." "No," Thorne said. "We are betting that they will underestimate us. There is a difference. They think humanity is a solved problem now. A closed book. That is exactly what we need them to think, for as long as possible." Behind them, in the cargo holds of the Providence and the 11 other ships that had escaped with her, were 40,000 humans. Not soldiers, not fighters, but the seeds of a civilization, teachers, engineers, doctors, farmers, children who had been born during the war and would grow up never remembering a version of humanity that was not hiding, planning, and waiting. Marcus thought of something Elena had said to him before they parted, in the last hours before the final battle for Earth. "We are not running away," she had told him. "We are planting a seed where the wind cannot reach it. Let them think the tree is dead. Roots do not need sunlight to grow." Back above Earth, the surrender was formalized within hours. Warlord Kal descended to the surface himself, walking through the ruins of what had once been a great human city, flanked by his personal guard, cameras from a dozen Threxian news networks capturing every step for the Empire to see. This was the moment. This was the trophy. Humanity, the loud, stubborn little species that had cost the Empire more ships and more soldiers than any campaign in a century, was finally kneeling. Elena Voss, along with the last officers who chose to stay and be captured rather than flee, stood before Kal in what remained of Earth's old government square. She held her head high even as Threxian soldiers bound her wrists. "You fought bravely, Admiral," Kal said, almost respectfully. "It is a shame such courage was wasted on a species with no future." "We do not need a future here," Elena said. "We only needed time. And you gave us plenty of it, chasing 40 ships around Earth for 11 years, while the real war was never fought at all." Kal frowned, something like uncertainty flickering behind his cold eyes. "What do you mean?" Elena smiled, the first true smile she had allowed herself in months. "You will understand one day. Ask your grandchildren, Warlord. Ask them how the great and mighty Threxian Empire once celebrated victory over a species it never actually defeated." Kal's guard struck her for the insolence, but she did not cry out. She simply kept smiling as they dragged her away to whatever fate awaited the prisoners of war. Across the galaxy, News of humanity's fall spread quickly. Other species, some allies of the Empire, some rivals, some neutral observers who had watched the long war with quiet curiosity, all received the same message. Humanity, the strange, aggressive, unpredictable newcomers to galactic civilization, had been crushed. Their fleet was destroyed. Their homeworld was occupied. Their leaders were captured or dead. The Threxian Empire held celebrations across 1,000 worlds. Warlord Khal was promoted to Grand Marshal, the youngest being ever to hold that rank, for delivering the final crushing blow to a species that had, for a time, actually frightened the Empire's war planners. Historians began writing accounts of the human-Threxian War as a triumphant tale of Threxian superiority over a chaotic, disorganized species that fought with more heart than sense. In the official Empire records, humanity's remaining population was listed as approximately 600 million, all confined to a single occupied homeworld, with no military capability, no independent fleet, and no ability to threaten galactic order ever again. The Empire never went looking for the 40,000 humans who had slipped away into deep space. Why would they? A defeated species does not run. A defeated species does not plan. A defeated species simply serves. That was the mistake. That single, arrogant assumption planted in the mind of every Threxian commander, every galactic historian, every alien child who grew up hearing stories about how the great empire had crushed the last resistance of humanity, would one day become the very reason for the Empire's undoing. 20 light-years from Earth, in a system with no name that appeared on no Threxian star chart, the 12 ships of Operation Quiet Exodus found a small, rocky planet orbiting a dim red star. It was cold, and the air was thin, and nothing about it looked like home. But it was theirs, and it was hidden, and for now, that was enough. Marcus Webb stood on the surface for the first time, his boots crunching on red dust under a sky the color of rust. Around him, engineers were already unloading equipment. Somewhere behind him, children who had never seen an open sky were laughing at the strange colors above them. General Thorne walked up beside him, looking out at the horizon. "We will call it Haven," he said, "because that is what it needs to be." Marcus nodded slowly. "How long do you think? Before we are ready?" Thorne was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know. 20 years. 50. However long it takes to build something the Empire cannot ignore. However long it takes to remember what Elena told them before they took her." What was that? Thorne's eyes were hard, fixed on the distant red horizon, as if he could see all the way back to Earth. That the Empire ignored humanity's final warning, and one day, the whole galaxy will know exactly what that mistake cost them. Above Haven, the stars turned slowly, patient and silent, keeping humanity's secret for as long as it needed to be kept. Somewhere far away, the galaxy celebrated a victory that had not, in truth, ever been complete. And in the quiet dark between the stars, a small, stubborn species began, once again, to build. 30 years passed on Haven. The red dust that had once crunched under the boots of 40,000 frightened refugees now supported farms, tunnels, workshops, and a city built mostly underground to hide its heat signature from any passing scan. The Threxian Empire had never come looking. Just as General Thorne had predicted, a defeated species was not worth chasing across the stars. The Empire had bigger conquests to plan, other worlds to bring under its banner. Earth and its 600 million occupied humans were a closed file, a finished war, a story told at Threxian dinner tables about the glorious campaign that had broken the last resistance in that quadrant of the galaxy. Nobody in the Empire remembered to ask what had happened to the ships that vanished during the final battle. On Haven, the humans who remained had not spent 30 years mourning. They had spent 30 years working. Dr. Marcus Webb, now 81 years old, silver-haired and slower on his feet but sharper than ever in his mind, walked through the underground research halls of what the colonists now simply called the Vault. Rows of engineers and scientists, many of them born on Haven and never having seen Earth's blue sky, worked at stations lit by soft artificial light. On the walls hung old photographs, salvaged from the data cores of the Providence, showing green fields and blue oceans that most of the young people in this room had only seen in pictures. Dr. Webb, a young woman, approached him, holding a datapad. Her name was Sarah Voss, granddaughter of Elena Voss, the admiral who had stayed behind 30 years ago to be captured so the rest of humanity could disappear. Sarah had grown up hearing her grandmother's story from survivors who had known her. Though no one on Haven knew if Elena was alive or dead, the Empire kept its prisoners of war quietly, and no word had ever come back. "Sarah," Marcus said, offering a tired smile, "tell me you have good news." "Better than good," Sarah said, and there was real excitement in her voice. "The shield modulation array is stable. We ran it through 600 simulated hits from weapons matching Threxian plasma cannons, scaled up from the old war data. 0 breaches." Marcus stopped walking. "Show me." Sarah pulled up the schematics on her datapad. The technology had begun, decades ago, from a strange piece of alien wreckage recovered by a scout ship during the war, a fragment of a ship from a species called the Cathari, who the humans had never fought directly, but who the Threxians clearly feared. The wreckage held pieces of a shielding technology far beyond anything humanity had built before the invasion. For 30 years, human scientists on Haven had studied that wreckage, reverse-engineered it, adapted it, and finally, painstakingly, made it their own. "If this works at full scale," Marcus said slowly, "our ships will be able to take hits that would have destroyed the last light in seconds, and keep fighting." "It's more than that," Sarah said. "The array does not just block damage, it absorbs the energy and stores it. We can redirect that energy straight back into weapon systems. The harder they hit us, the harder we can hit back." Marcus stared at the schematic for a long moment, feeling something he had not felt in years. Hope, real hope, the kind that did not need to be forced. "General Thorne needs to see this," he said. General Eris Thorne was no longer young either, but he still moved like a soldier, back straight, eyes sharp, though he now used a cane after an injury sustained in a mining accident a decade earlier. He had spent 30 years turning 40,000 refugees into something the old Elena Voss would have been proud of. A hidden nation, small but disciplined, poor in numbers but rich in purpose. He listened to Marcus and Sarah's report in the war room, a chamber carved into solid rock deep beneath Haven's surface, its walls covered with star charts and models of ship designs in various stages of development. "How long until we can install this on a full battle cruiser?" Thorne asked. 2 years, maybe 3, if we want it done right," Marcus said. "We have 3 cruisers under construction in the asteroid shipyards. Slow work, since we can only build using material and tools that will not create heat or radiation signatures visible from a distance. But the Retribution is nearly ready for her first internal systems tests." Thorne nodded slowly, looking at the star charts on the wall, worlds marked in red where the Threxian Empire held territory, a vast and growing stain across a third of the known galaxy. "The Empire keeps expanding," he said quietly. "Every year, more systems fall under their banner, more species become servants, or die, refusing to become servants. We are not just planning to save ourselves anymore, Marcus. If we wait too long, there will be nothing left to save." "I know," Marcus said, "but we cannot rush this. One mistake, one detected launch, one scout ship that gets too close to Haven, and 30 years of work ends in an afternoon. We have exactly one chance to reveal ourselves, and it has to be enough to matter." Sarah, still standing at the edge of the room, spoke up. "There's something else you should both know. Our long-range listening posts picked up something interesting last week. A trade convoy passing near the edge of this system reported rumors. Whispers among smaller species who trade with the Empire. Some of them are getting tired of Threxian rule. Taxes have gone up. Conscription into the Threxian military has increased for subject species. There is unhappiness out there, more than the Empire likes to admit." Thorne's eyes sharpened. "Allies," he said. "Not yet, perhaps, but possible allies." "It's more than that," Sarah continued. "There are stories, old stories, about humanity. Some species remember the war. Some of them are surprised humanity fought as long as it did, against an empire so much larger. A few of the older traders even seem to admire it, quietly, when Threxian ears are not listening." Marcus allowed himself a small, thin smile. "Then perhaps the Empire has not entirely erased us from the galaxy's memory after all." "No," Thorne said, "but they believe they have erased us as a threat. That is the only thing that matters right now. Let them keep believing it a little longer. While Haven grew in secret, life on occupied Earth continued under Threxian rule, harsh but stable. The 600 million humans who remained on the homeworld lived under strict Threxian oversight, forced to work in mines and factories that fed the Empire's endless war machine, their old cities rebuilt, not for humanity's benefit, but to house Threxian garrisons and administrative offices. Among these humans, whispers of another kind circulated too, quieter and more careful than anything spoken on Haven, because here, the Threxian ears were always listening. Stories of ships that vanished during the final battle. Stories, some said, of an admiral who told the Threxian warlord that humanity would return. An old woman named Petra Lang, who had been a teenager during the war and remembered the last battle over Earth from a bomb shelter beneath the old capital, told these stories to her grandchildren in whispers at night. "They are out there," she would say. "I do not know where, and I do not know when, but they are out there, and one day, the sky is going to change." Her grandchildren did not always believe her. Life under occupation had a way of making hope feel like a foolish luxury. But some of them remembered her words anyway, tucked away like a secret they were not sure was true, but wanted to be. Back on Haven, 5 years after Sarah's shield breakthrough, the Retribution completed her first full systems test in the hidden asteroid shipyard. She was not large by Threxian standards, barely a third of the size of their smallest warships, but she carried the new shielding array, weapons systems reverse-engineered and improved from 30 years of quiet research, and a crew trained not just in combat, but in patience. Captain Idris Reyes, 40 years old, born on Haven 3 years after the Exodus, stood on the bridge of the Retribution as the ship powered up for the first time, lights flickering across control panels that generations of engineers had built by hand, piece by piece, in secret. "All systems nominal," reported his weapons officer. Idris looked out through the viewport at the dim red star that had been humanity's only sun for 35 years. He thought of the stories his grandmother had told him, stories of a blue and green world he had never seen, of an admiral who stayed behind so the rest of them could run and grow and one day come back. "General Thorne," Idris said into the comm, "the Retribution is ready." In the war room below, Thorne, now in his 70s, closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of 3 decades settle onto this single moment. "One ship is not an army," he said quietly to Marcus, who stood beside him. "No," Marcus agreed, "but it is a beginning, and 35 years ago, we had nothing at all except a promise Elena Voss made to a Threxian warlord who laughed in her face." Thorne opened his eyes. "Then let us make sure, when the day finally comes, that he stops laughing." Above them, in the shipyards hidden inside a hollowed-out asteroid, 3 more hulls were already under construction, their frames illuminated by dim work lights, watched over by engineers who had grown up believing in a future their parents and grandparents had risked everything to build. The Empire, 1,000 light-years away, continued its endless campaigns of conquest, confident that humanity was nothing more than a footnote in its long and glorious history. It did not know that footnote was still writing itself, quietly, patiently, one hull, one shield array, one whispered story at a time. 10 more years passed. Haven was no longer a single hidden colony. It was the heart of something larger, something that had grown quietly in the dark corners of the galaxy. The Empire never bothered to map carefully. Human scout ships, small and silent, had spent those years making careful contact with other species who lived at the edges of Threxian territory. Species who were unhappy under the Empire's rule but too weak or too scattered to resist alone. The Velkari, a species of tall, thin traders who had lost most of their independent fleet decades ago in a war with the Threxians, were the first to agree to a quiet alliance. Then came the Dorun, a rocky, slow-moving species with unmatched skill in mining and metallurgy, who had been forced to hand over most of their resources to the Empire for generations. None of these alliances were declared openly. None of them involved grand speeches or public treaties. They were built in secret, ship by ship, favor by favor, over careful years, exactly the way Haven itself had been built. General Thorne had died 2 years earlier, peacefully, in his sleep, at the age of 84. Command of Haven's growing fleet and its careful plans passed to a new generation, led now by Admiral Idris Reyes, the same officer who had once stood on the bridge of the very first ship, the Retribution, feeling the weight of 35 years of hidden work beneath his boots. Idris was 50 now, his hair beginning to gray, but his eyes were sharp, and his mind was sharper. He stood in the war room, the same chamber Thorn had once used, now expanded to hold star charts covering half the galaxy, most of it marked in the deep red of Threxian territory, but here and there, small green markers showed the quiet network of allied worlds humanity had built. Sarah Voss, now in her 50s, no longer a young engineer but the chief architect of Haven's entire fleet, stood beside him. "Admiral," she said, "the Vengeance completed her trials last week. She is the largest ship we have ever built. Full shield array, 12 times the firepower of the Retribution, and a crew of 600. "How many ships do we have now in total?" Idris asked. 41 warships, Sarah said, "not counting support vessels, or the ships our allies can contribute if the day ever comes. It is still small, compared to the Empire's fleet of thousands, but it is no longer nothing." Idris studied the star charts for a long moment. 40 years, he said quietly. 40 years since Elena Voss stood on the bridge of the last light and told Warlord Cal that humanity would return. Do you think she ever imagined it would take this long? "I think," Sarah said, "she imagined it might take longer. I think she knew that some things cannot be rushed, no matter how much you want them to be." Far across the galaxy, the Threxian Empire had continued its relentless expansion. What had once been a single powerful empire was now a sprawling collection of subject worlds, tax burdens, and increasingly restless populations. Grand Marshal Kahl, now an old Threxian by his species standards, still held tremendous influence within the Empire's military command, though younger officers whispered that his best days were behind him, that his obsession with the old human campaign, the one triumph he still bragged about at every formal gathering, had become something of a tired joke among the newer generation of commanders. Cal did not care what the younger officers thought. He had crushed a species that had, for a brief and uncomfortable decade, actually frightened Threxian war planners with its stubborn refusal to surrender easily. He kept a small trophy in his personal quarters, a piece of shattered hull plating recovered from the last light after its capture, engraved with a small plaque that read simply, "The Last Human Warship." He did not know that, at that very moment, 41 human warships, each one more advanced than the last light had ever been, sat quietly in hidden shipyards 1,000 light-years away. He did not know that Elena Voss, the admiral who had once warned him, was still alive. She had spent the last 4 decades as a prisoner, moved between several Threxian labor facilities on occupied Earth, never given any position of authority, but also, curiously, never executed. Some believed the Empire kept her alive as a symbol, a living trophy to remind humanity of its defeat. Others believed simply that no one in the vast Threxian bureaucracy had ever bothered to file the paperwork for her execution, and so she had simply continued existing, quietly, in the corner of a system that no longer thought much about her at all. Elena was 91 years old now, her body frail, her hair long since turned white, but her mind remained as sharp as it had been on the bridge of the last light. She spent her days in a small labor camp on the outskirts of the old human capital, tending to a garden the Threxian guards allowed the elderly prisoners to keep, mostly because it kept them quiet and occupied. It was there, tending to a row of stubborn vegetables growing in poor soil, that a young guard named Petra Lang's granddaughter, a woman named Nadia, approached her one evening after most of the other prisoners had gone inside. "Admiral Voss," Nadia said quietly, glancing around to make sure no Threxian guards were close enough to hear. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about you. She said you told the Threxian warlord that humanity would come back." Elena looked up slowly, studying the young woman's face. "Your grandmother's name?" "Petra Lang." Elena's tired eyes softened with something like memory. "I remember Petra. She was a young girl during the war. Sharp eyes, even then." Elena straightened slowly, her old joints protesting the movement. "Yes, I told Warlord Kahl that humanity would return. I believe it still." "After 40 years?" Nadia asked, unable to keep a note of doubt from her voice. 40 years is nothing, Elena said, if you are patient, and if you never stop building. I do not know where they are, child. I do not know if the ships that escaped that day ever grew into anything at all, but I know humanity does not forget, and it does not give up. If they are alive out there, they are not sitting idle, they are working. And one day, this sky is going to change. Nadia glanced up at the darkening sky above the labor camp, streaked with the lights of Threxian patrol ships moving in slow, lazy circles. I hope you are right, Admiral. So do I, Elena said softly. So do I. Back on Haven, tensions were building for a different reason. Reports from Allied scout ships along the edge of Threxian territory had grown increasingly troubling. The Empire, hungry for new resources to fuel its endless expansion, had begun a fresh campaign against a cluster of small, independent worlds near the border. A peaceful farming species called the Elena, who had never posed any threat to anyone, and had no meaningful military of their own. They are going to wipe them out, Sarah said, studying the reports in the war room. Just like they tried to do to us, 40 years ago. Except the Elena do not have anywhere to run, no hidden colony, no 40 years to prepare. Idris studied the star charts grimly. The Elena homeworld sat almost exactly on the edge of the region Haven's scout network monitored. It would be possible, just barely possible, to send ships to intervene. But doing so would mean revealing humanity's existence to the Empire decades before Haven's fleet was ready for a full confrontation. If we do nothing, Idris said slowly, an entire species is erased, the same way we almost were. If we act, we risk everything we have built before we are ready. The room was silent for a long moment. Every officer present understood the weight of the choice in front of them. There is a third option, Sarah said quietly. We do not need to reveal our full strength. We send a small force, enough to disrupt the attack, buy the Elena time to evacuate what they can, and disappear before the Empire understands what happened. A shadow, not a declaration. Idris considered this for a long moment, thinking of Elena Voss, a woman he had never met but whose choices, 40 years ago, had shaped every single day of his life. She had sacrificed herself so that humanity could disappear into the dark and grow. Perhaps it was time for humanity to step, carefully, back into the light, if only for a moment, to save others the way no one had ever been able to save them. Prepare the Retribution and 2 escort ships, Idris said finally. Captain Reyes, you will lead the mission personally. This is not a declaration of war, this is a rescue. Strike fast, cause enough confusion to disrupt their attack fleet, and get out before they can identify the source. No unnecessary engagement, no unnecessary risk. And if they identify us anyway? Sarah asked. Idris's eyes were steady. Then the Empire learns a little early that the war it thinks it won 40 years ago was never actually finished. Perhaps it is time they started remembering that warning Elena Voss gave them, before they forget it completely. Within hours, 3 human warships slipped quietly out of Haven's hidden shipyards, moving through the dark toward a small farming world that did not know rescue was coming, carrying the first open act of resistance humanity had attempted in 4 decades. Far away, in his private quarters, Grand Marshal Kahl slept soundly beside his trophy plaque, unaware that the war he believed he had won so completely, so long ago, was about to begin writing its true final chapter. The Threxian attack fleet arrived above the Elena homeworld exactly on schedule, 20 warships under the command of a young and ambitious officer, named Fleet Commander Drassic, eager to make a name for himself the way Kahl had made his name decades ago. The Elena had no real defense fleet, only a scattering of unarmed trade vessels and a handful of old patrol ships, better suited for chasing pirates than fighting an empire. Drassic expected an easy campaign. He did not expect the 3 unmarked warships that dropped out of hidden space directly behind his fleet's rear formation. Captain Idris Reyes stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching the Threxian formation on the main view screen. Beside him, his weapons officer, a sharp young woman named Talia Okafor, waited for the order. Target their rear supply ships and the 2 closest escorts, Idris said. Full power to the shield arrays. Let us see how they like being on the receiving end of a surprise for once. The Retribution and her 2 escorts opened fire in perfect coordination. Energy weapons built from 40 years of hidden research, tearing into the unprepared Threxian rear guard. 2 supply ships were destroyed within seconds. An escort cruiser took a direct hit to its engine core and spun out of formation, venting atmosphere into the void. Fleet Commander Drasik's confusion was total. His sensors could not identify the attacking ships. They did not match any known hostile species in the region. His scans registered energy signatures unlike anything in Threxian records. Not quite the crude technology historical files described as belonging to the long-defeated human species, but something else entirely, something advanced. "Identify those ships," Drasik shouted at his bridge crew. "Unable to identify, Commander. Shield technology is unrecognized. Weapons profile does not match any species in our database." Idris watched the chaos spreading through the Threxian formation with grim satisfaction. "Enough," he said after 90 seconds of sustained assault. "We have bought the Elena the time they need. Withdraw. Do not let them get a clean sensor lock on our hull markings." The 3 human ships vanished back into hidden space as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind a battered and confused Threxian fleet, 2 destroyed vessels, and a fleet commander whose ambitions for an easy victory had just been badly bruised. Below, on the Elena homeworld, evacuation ships that had been desperately loading refugees during the chaos of the attack managed to escape into deep space, carrying nearly 60,000 Elena civilians to safety among allied worlds that Haven had quietly cultivated over the past decade. The homeworld itself would still fall to Threxian occupation days later, but an entire generation of Elena survived because of those 90 seconds. Fleet Commander Drasik's report to Empire High Command that evening was furious and confused in equal measure. He described unknown attackers with advanced shielding technology, weapons capable of disabling Threxian cruisers in a single strike, and a coordinated withdrawal executed with military precision. The report eventually reached the desk of Grand Marshal Kahl, now serving in an advisory role within High Command, mostly consulted on historical campaigns rather than active operations. He read the report twice, his old eyes narrowing at certain details. Unknown shielding technology. Precision strikes against rear supply lines. A coordinated 3-ship strike force that appeared and disappeared without any warning. Something about it nagged at the back of his mind, a memory 40 years old, buried under decades of other campaigns and other conquests. He dismissed it after a moment. Pirates, perhaps. Or a new, unknown species testing Threxian defenses along the border. It could not possibly be connected to a war that had ended so completely, so long ago. He filed the report and moved on to other matters. On Haven, the return of the Retribution and her escorts was met with quiet, careful celebration. No parades, no grand speeches. Admiral Idris Reyes understood, as Thorn and Marcus and Elena had all understood before him, that humanity's survival still depended on patience above all else. 60,000 Elena are alive tonight who would not have been, Idris told the war room after receiving Captain Reyes's full report. That matters, but we cannot mistake one successful raid for readiness. The Empire will investigate. They will search for answers. We must be prepared for the possibility that they eventually find us. Sarah, now serving as Haven's senior fleet architect and unofficial historian, studied the reports from Threxian communication intercepts gathered by Allied trade contacts. "There is something else," she said. "Word is spreading, quietly, among the smaller species along the border. Stories of unknown ships that struck back against a Threxian raiding fleet and disappeared. Some are already calling it the work of ghosts. Others are starting to whisper an older word." "What word?" Idris asked. "Human," Sarah said. A few of the older Elena refugees who reached Allied space reported that the attacking ships bore a faint resemblance, in shape and design philosophy, to old historical records of human warships from 40 years ago. It is a small detail, but rumors like this do not stay small forever. Idris considered this carefully. Humanity's carefully guarded secret was no longer entirely secret. It was, for now, still just a rumor, a story traded between refugees and cautious traders in the dark corners of the galaxy. But rumors had a way of growing, especially rumors that carried hope. "Then we accelerate," Idris said finally, quietly, but faster than before. "Sarah, how long until the Vengeance-class ships can be produced in greater numbers?" 2 years, for the next 5 hulls, if we push the shipyards to their limit, Sarah said. But pushing that hard risks detection. Increased mining activity, increased energy signatures. It is a gamble. It is a gamble we may not be able to avoid, Idris said. The Empire will not stop expanding. Every world like the Elena that falls under their control makes them stronger and makes our eventual fight harder. We cannot save everyone quietly forever. Eventually, we will need to be ready to fight openly and win. Weeks later, deep within occupied Earth, whispers of the strange rumors from the border reached even the labor camps, where the last generation of the original war's survivors lived out their remaining years under Threxian rule. Elena Voss, now 91, and moving more slowly than ever, heard the story from Nadia, who had heard it from a trader who occasionally smuggled small news items into the camp in exchange for old Earth artifacts the guards did not bother to confiscate. Ships that struck a Threxian raiding fleet and vanished, Nadia whispered to her one evening in the garden. No one knows who they were, but some say the ships looked human. Elena sat very still for a long moment, her old hands resting on her knees, her eyes fixed on the darkening sky above the camp. For 40 years, she had held on to a single certainty, unshaken by decades of captivity, unshaken by the slow decline of her body, unshaken by watching an entire generation of humans grow up and grow old under Threxian rule, with no memory of a free Earth at all. They are coming back, Elena said quietly, more to herself than to Nadia. It has taken longer than even I expected, but they are coming back. Do you think they will save us? Nadia asked. The ones still here, still under Threxian rule? Elena turned to look at her, and for the first time in years, something like real fire returned to her tired old eyes. I think, she said slowly, that whoever built those ships did not forget us, not for one single day of the last 40 years. And when they are ready, truly ready, this entire sky is going to burn with something the Threxian Empire has never seen before, an angry species that spent 4 decades preparing exactly for this moment. Above them, the stars turned in their slow, patient circles, indifferent to empires and wars, and whispered hopes. But somewhere among those stars, hidden in the dark for 4 decades, a fleet was growing, quietly, carefully, and with absolute purpose. Grand Marshal Kahl received a second report 3 months later, this time far more troubling than the first. A second Threxian raiding fleet, this one attempting to subdue a mining colony belonging to the Doruan, a species long known for their quiet cooperation with Empire demands, had been ambushed and driven off entirely, losing 4 warships in a battle that lasted less than 10 minutes. This time, sensor data was clearer. Whoever these attackers were, their technology was not merely unusual. It was, in several key areas, superior to standard Threxian military hardware. Kahl sat alone in his private quarters that night, staring at the shattered piece of hull plating mounted on his wall, engraved with the words, "The Last Human Warship." For the first time in 40 years, a cold, uncomfortable thought crept into the old warlord's mind, one he had dismissed too easily after the first report. He remembered a woman standing before him in chains, 40 years ago, smiling despite her capture, telling him that humanity would return, and that he would remember her warning when it cost the Empire everything. He had laughed at her then. He was not laughing now. Slowly, deliberately, Kahl reached for a secure comm channel and requested an emergency meeting with Empire High Command, something he had not done in over a decade. Whatever these unknown attackers were, human or otherwise, one thing had become clear to him at last. The galaxy's confident assumption that humanity was a finished chapter in Threxian history might have been the single greatest mistake the Empire had ever made. Grand Marshal Kahl's emergency meeting with Empire High Command did not go the way he hoped. He stood before the ruling council of Threxian war planners, aged commanders and younger officers alike, and told them what he suspected, that the strange attacks along the border were not the work of pirates or unknown minor species, but of humanity, the very species the Empire had declared completely defeated 4 decades earlier. The council laughed at him, much the way he had once laughed at Elena Voss. Humanity was crushed, said one young commander, barely older than the war itself. Their homeworld remains occupied. Their fleet was destroyed to the last ship. You yourself accepted their surrender, Grand Marshal. Are you suggesting a broken, unarmed species somehow rebuilt an entire war fleet in secret, without any of our scouts noticing for 40 years? Call had no proof, only old instinct and an uncomfortable memory. The council dismissed his concerns as the fading paranoia of an aging officer clinging to relevance. Fleet Commander Drassic, still humiliated by his failed campaigns, quietly agreed with the council's dismissal, unwilling to admit that unknown ships had twice bested his forces. Kal returned to his quarters that night, angry and unsettled, but with no official support to investigate further. He sent one final message, this one personal and unofficial, to the labor camp administrator responsible for occupied Earth's remaining prisoners. Increase surveillance on the prisoner Elena Voss, the message read. I want to know everything she says, to anyone, from this day forward. It was, in its own small way, the closest thing to an admission that Kal had ever made, that the warning given to him 4 decades earlier might not have been an empty threat after all. On Haven, humanity's leadership received word of the failed council meeting through their careful network of allied contacts within days. Sarah Voss brought the news to Admiral Idris Reyes personally. They do not believe it, Sarah said. Most of the Empire's leadership still considers humanity a closed chapter. Only Kal himself suspects the truth, and even he has no proof, and no support from his own command. Idris allowed himself a small, grim smile. Then the Empire has made the same mistake twice. They ignored Elena's warning 40 years ago, and now they are ignoring the evidence sitting directly in front of them. For how much longer can that last? Sarah asked. Every raid we conduct adds to the pattern. Eventually, someone in the Empire will connect the details clearly enough that even the Council cannot ignore it. Then we make sure, Idris said, that when they finally understand, it is far too late for them to do anything about it. The following 2 years were the busiest in Haven's history. Shipyards that had once produced a single hull every few years now produced entire squadrons. Allied worlds, the Valkyrie, the Doruun, the rescued remnant of the Elena, and several smaller species, who had quietly reached out after hearing the growing rumors of humanity's return, contributed resources, manpower, and in some cases, entire small fleets of their own, to what had become known simply as the Coalition. Humanity was no longer alone in the dark. It had become the quiet center of a growing alliance of species, tired of Threxian rule, all of them waiting, patiently, for the moment when hiding would no longer be necessary. That moment came sooner than anyone expected. Grand Marshal Kal's private surveillance of Elena Voss eventually uncovered something the Empire could not ignore. Intercepted whispers among the labor camp prisoners about ships, about rescues along the border, about a growing certainty that humanity's exiled survivors were alive and preparing for something. Kal took this evidence, along with growing sensor data from 3 more failed border campaigns, back to High Command. This time they listened. Empire High Command authorized a full military investigation, deploying scout fleets to sweep the outer regions of the galaxy for any sign of a hidden human civilization. It took them 4 months to find the first trace, a faint energy signature near an asteroid field that Haven's shipyards had, in their rush to expand, not fully concealed. Admiral Idris Reyes received the warning from Haven's outer sensor network at 2 in the morning, Haven Standard Time. Threxian scout ship detected at the edge of the system, the report read. They are running before we can intercept. They know we are here. Idris stood in the war room, now filled with senior officers from across the Coalition, humans, and Valkyrie, and Doruun, and Elena representatives alike, all watching him with the same question in their eyes. This is it, Idris said quietly. 44 years of hiding ends tonight. The Empire will know exactly where to find us within days. We have 2 choices. We can run again, abandon Haven, and hide somewhere else, buying a little more time. Or we finish what Elena Voss started, and we finish it now, on our terms, not theirs. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Sarah Voss, standing at the edge of the chamber, spoke the words that would decide humanity's future. My grandmother did not run so that we could keep running forever, she said. She stayed behind so that we could build something strong enough to stop running. I say we finish it. One by one, every voice in the room agreed. The Battle of Haven's Gate, as it would later be remembered across 1,000 worlds, began 3 weeks later, when the Threxian Empire, humiliated and alarmed by the confirmed existence of a hidden human fleet, sent a punishing force of 300 warships to crush the rebellion before it could grow any further. Grand Marshal Kahl, despite his advanced age, insisted on commanding the assault personally, determined to finish once and for all the war he had believed won 44 years earlier. He was not prepared for what awaited him. Humanity did not fight alone. The full might of the coalition met the Threxian assault fleet at the edge of Haven's home system. 80 human warships, each equipped with shielding and weapons technology 40 years in the making, supported by 200 allied vessels from a dozen different species, who had all, in their own ways, suffered under Threxian rule, and had waited patiently for this exact moment. The battle raged for 11 hours. Threxian numbers were still greater, but their technology, unchanged and unchallenged for decades, could not match the advanced shielding arrays that had once been nothing more than a piece of alien wreckage, salvaged during humanity's darkest hour. Ship after Threxian ship found its weapons fire absorbed and redirected, its formations broken by coordinated strikes from a fleet that fought with the discipline of a species that had spent 44 years preparing for precisely this single, decisive engagement. Aboard his flagship, Grand Marshal Kahl watched his once invincible fleet crumble around him, ship by ship, and felt something he had not felt in over 4 decades, real fear. "Identify their flagship," he ordered, his voice tight. "I want to see who commands this fleet." The image that appeared on his view screen showed Admiral Idris Reyes, standing calm and steady on the bridge of the Vengeance, humanity's largest warship, surrounded by the desperate wreckage of the Threxian assault force. "Grand Marshal Kahl," Idris said, his voice carrying across every open channel in the battle, broadcast not just to the Threxian fleet, but to every allied ship, every listening post, every corner of the galaxy that could receive the signal. 44 years ago, an admiral named Elena Voss warned you that humanity would return. You ignored her warning. You told the galaxy that humanity was defeated, that our species was finished, that we would spend the rest of our history serving your empire. I am here to tell you, and every world listening to this broadcast, that the Empire ignored humanity's final warning, and it has just cost you everything. Kahl stared at the screen, at the calm, unshakable resolve in the human admiral's eyes, and for the first time in his long life, he understood, completely and finally, the terrible mistake his empire had made. The battle ended with the surrender of what remained of the Threxian assault fleet, barely 40 ships out of the original 300. Grand Marshal Kahl himself was taken prisoner, the same fate he had once forced upon Elena Voss, though the coalition, unlike the Threxian Empire, chose to treat their captured enemy with dignity rather than cruelty. News of the battle spread across the galaxy within days, carried by traders, by refugees, by every species who had quietly hoped for exactly this outcome. The Threxian Empire, which had spent decades presenting itself as unstoppable, had suffered its first true defeat in living memory, at the hands of a species it had declared extinct as a military power 44 years earlier. Across 100 worlds, subject species who had quietly resented Threxian rule for generations began to openly question the Empire's strength for the first time. Some rose in open rebellion within weeks. Others simply began, quietly, to reach out to the growing coalition, asking to join what humanity and its allies had built. On occupied Earth, the effects were immediate and profound. Word of the battle reached the labor camps within days, carried by guards who could no longer hide the news, and by prisoners who wept openly upon hearing it. Elena Voss, 95 years old now, frail but alive, sat in her small garden when Nadia came running to tell her the news. "They did it," Nadia said, breathless. "The humans, the ones who escaped, they came back. They beat a Threxian fleet. It's true, Admiral. Everything you said was true." Elena closed her eyes for a long moment, feeling the weight of 44 years finally begin to lift from her tired shoulders. When she opened them again, there were tears on her weathered face, but she was smiling. "Of course it's true," she said softly. "I told them. I told them. Humanity does not forget, and it does not stop building. I only wish I could see them, before the end. She did not have to wait long. 3 days later, a small coalition shuttle descended quietly onto occupied Earth, escorted by 2 human warships that the remaining Threxian garrison, already reeling from news of the disaster at Haven's Gate, did not dare to challenge. Admiral Idris Reyes himself walked through the ruins of the old labor camp, searching, until he found an old woman sitting quietly in a small garden, waiting. "Admiral Voss," he said, kneeling before her, "my name is Idris Reyes. I was born on Haven, 3 years after your final battle. I have spent my entire life trying to finish what you started." Elena looked at him for a long moment, at the calm strength in his eyes, so similar to the officers she had once commanded on the bridge of the last light, and felt, finally, that her long wait was over. "You did more than finish it," she said quietly. "You proved it. The galaxy thought humanity was defeated. Now at last, they know exactly how wrong they were." Above them, for the first time in 44 years, human warships flew freely and openly over Earth's sky, no longer hiding, no longer waiting. The war was not entirely over. The Threxian Empire, though badly wounded, still held vast territory and considerable strength. But something fundamental had changed, something the entire galaxy would remember for generations to come. Humanity had been given a final warning to give, and the Empire had chosen to ignore it. In the end, that single arrogant choice, made in a moment of overwhelming victory 44 years earlier, became the very seed of the Empire's greatest defeat, and the beginning of humanity's return to the stars, not as a broken and defeated people, but as a species the galaxy would never again dare to underestimate.